Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And we are going to have an opportunity to learn from one of the best, learn from one of our master instructors, Pat Clark, who's going to kind of walk us through some strategies on presenting, particularly virtually, some different things that have been helpful. So Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bridget. Okay, so we're calling this session Set Up for Success, or How to Enhance Your Evaluation Scores, right? Which is something that I think all of us want to do. And I find that it's kind of an ongoing process, right? It just continues. And so one of the first things I'm going to ask you to do, though, this morning is what I'd like you to do is to give me a stretch up over your head. Okay, out to your side. Back up over the head. And one more out to the side. Okay, and then if you would, take a deep breath in through your nose and then out through your mouth. And one more in through your nose, out through your mouth, and one last time, in through the nose and out through your mouth. So a few years ago, there was a study done, and the study was to try to determine what is the attention span of a goldfish. And while they were doing this study, they also decided that they were going to take a look at what is the attention span of a human. And lo and behold, when they got the results in, now this is attention in terms of strictly paying attention, really focused in on nothing else but what is going on. They found that the humans could pay attention for 7 seconds, while the goldfish were the winners, and they could pay attention for 8 seconds, right? Pretty bad. The reason I tell you this is because that's one of the problems that we have when we're presenting, is keeping the attention of our humans. And it can be very easy for them to wander off on us, and especially wander off on us when we're presenting virtually. So today we're going to focus on virtual presenting. At the summit, we're going to talk more about presenting in person and just presenting in general. And also today I'm going to kind of go through this and not take questions as we're going along, which is something I usually don't do, but we will take some questions when we get to the end. So why did I have you stretch and breathe? Well, one of the things that we know is the way to get us into our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, which is where we need to be if we want to learn and pay attention, is by doing exactly that, stretching and breathing. I teach this to teachers all of the time. You know, when kids come back from recess, or when they come back from a fire drill, or when they're changing from one activity to another. A few simple stretches and 3 deep breaths help to put them back in that prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain. So oftentimes, this is something I will do not only when I present virtually, but also in person, is to have people do that when we're doing some transition activities or when we come back from a break. Again, it's just a good way to get them back into that thinking brain. So when it comes to presenting, we know that the better we are at presenting, the more our audience is going to stay engaged, the more our audience is going to learn, the more likely the audience is to recommend mental health first aid to other individuals, and we will also increase our evaluation scores. With mental health first aid and the curriculum, we know that there are drawbacks for sure. For example, one of the major drawbacks is that length of time. And studies will show that if you typically have a full day in-person presentation, it should be cut in half if you're doing it on a webinar or virtually. And obviously we know that, the curriculum really, we're locked into it. It doesn't allow us to do that. So we're already starting off kind of in a deficit area. Again, because what we see is that it really should be shorter periods of time when you're doing it virtually. And again, that length of time is definitely a drawback, whether it's virtually or in person. Trying to maintain focus for that amount of time is difficult. I think about kids in school and what we require of them, being in school all day. But they get some breaks, right? They get a lot of activities. They get to move around some. Our virtual audience really doesn't get much of that. And we also know that there is a lot of content. And because there's a lot of content and we need to maintain fidelity, it can be difficult to get through it. We also know that virtually, right? We really have no idea what our audience is doing. We ask them to stay on camera, but it's very easy to get sidetracked. So all of these are kind of things that we're starting out with that can be difficult at best. So how are we going to try and alleviate some of these concerns? What are some things that we're going to do? First and foremost, regardless of whatever it is that you're doing in terms of a presentation, is practice, practice, practice. Especially as we're first coming on as instructors, there's so much content to learn. It can be very, very difficult. So we really need to practice. And I oftentimes recommend, practicing on Zoom, record yourself. It's a way to help yourself get ready for that presentation with individuals. Certainly knowing your platform. So if you're using Zoom, which most of us do now, get on there and play around with it. I think that was one of the biggest learning curves for me when we first started doing virtual, was how do I manage all of that? So knowing the platform can be a real key to your success. Coordinate, right? Coordinate with whoever is hosting the training. So ask them, who's the audience? Have they had any previous presentations or trainings on mental health? Does the host have any particular expectations for their audience, for their participants? And then just answer any questions or concerns that the host might have. I also, when I'm talking to the host, if it's going to be in person, we're going to find out, what's the setup. But when we're coordinating for virtual, it's primarily who is that audience? Who are we speaking to? Do they have any background in mental health? Also, co-instructing, who does what? And Bridget really has that nice form for us pretty well set up, so it's easy to do. So schedule a time to meet with your co-instructor. I usually try and do it on Zoom, so we can talk about exactly what it is we're going to do, who's going to do what segments. And I say there's a comfort factor. For some people, they'll say, oh, I really don't like doing this particular segment. Would you mind doing it? Or I really feel comfortable with this segment. Can I do it? So again, who's going to do which sections, the whole monitoring the chat, attendance. Now on attendance for virtual, I generally ask the co-instructor to also take attendance, just so we're not missing anyone. And usually we'll take it at the beginning of the day and then when we come back from our lunch break. because lo and behold, occasionally people end up missing, right? Timing, who's going to keep track of where you are in terms of the time? Breakout rooms, how are you going to handle those? And we'll talk about those a little bit more. Scenarios or scenario, which one or ones are you going to do? Where are you going to break? I always like to the what if. So what if my computer suddenly stops working? How are we going to communicate? So making sure that I have the other person's cell phone number so we can text back and forth if there are problems or concerns. What if we have a participant that isn't on camera? How are we going to handle that? So just some of those what if situations that you may run into. And then what time are you going to get on Zoom or whatever platform you're using? Generally, I like to try and get on a half hour early so we can make sure that our tech is working properly. And again, that what if my tech goes out, but the other person can then take over and I can still do my segments, but they're operating the tech. And then prior to presenting, check your lighting. Now I've got a little light that I use on my laptop. It's kind of a tiny ring light that sometimes helps with lighting because the room that I happen to be in, sometimes it's really sunny, sometimes it's really dark. So I try and check my lighting at the beginning and usually sometime during the day just to make sure people can see me. And then also be mindful of your background, right? We really want to eliminate any kind of distracting background. So I think about this when COVID was in full force, and there were a lot of people that are on the news shows and various shows that were broadcasting from home. And there was this one guy that would come on occasionally, and he broadcast from his kitchen, which was kind of cool. And he had the neatest kitchen. But in the background, there was also a chalkboard, and on that chalkboard was a list of everything they were going to have to eat for the entire week. So he would come on, and instead of me focusing on what he was talking about, I started focusing on, what was on that chalkboard. So I really wasn't listening to what he had to say. So in my case, the room that I happen to be in, there's not really kind of like a good space where I can have something behind me that's not distracting. So I just kind of go with the blurred background. I say dress for success, and certainly not, you don't have to wear a suit like she's wearing. But in other words, if you would typically be presenting in person, try and wear that same type of top at least while you're presenting virtually. The reason for that is psychological. If we're kind of dressed in our shorts and t-shirt, that puts us in the shorts and t-shirt mode. So, again, just dressing so you're kind of ready to present. If possible, the other thing that I really recommend is that you use dual monitors. And I know a lot of people go, oh, it's kind of, I don't know about that. I was one of those people. And when I finally got my second monitor, it was like, it changed my life. It just made things so much easier. And you can usually pick them up fairly inexpensively to have that second monitor. But just to give you an idea, I tried to take a shot of like what I see when I'm presenting. So that on the left-hand side there, that's what I see on my laptop monitor. So it shows me the slide that's currently up. It shows me the next slide that is coming up, so I can be prepared for that. If you look up into the corner there, you'll see a little picture of me taking a picture of the monitor so I can see the video. And then I also have the chat box. And on the other side, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there we have my computer, my laptop, and then the extra screen. So I always encourage individuals, if you can, to use a dual monitor. And again, practice with it. They're easy to hook up. I think you'll find it makes your presenting life virtually much easier. Consider doing your presentation standing up. And why do I say that? Because if we were presenting in person, we would be standing up. And sometimes when we're doing it and we're sitting down, we may have a tendency to slouch, not quite be as engaged. So if you can, it's a good way to do it. You know, I purchased one of those stand-up desk, an inexpensive one, and oftentimes I will be standing. Now, a lot of times I'm not standing the entire time, but I have like a chair behind me that kind of gives me a little bit of support. Making eye contact with the camera. This is something that can be difficult to do. If you want to practice doing it, take your cell phone, put it in the mode where you can see yourself and time yourself for a certain amount of time. Again, it's like you would do if you were presenting in person, so you need to make that same eye contact with individuals. Voice inflection is also important when you're online. It's one of those things that can be, again, difficult to do. And the reason is that the microphone has a tendency to take our voice to kind of a standard level where most people would be. So using voice inflection can help as well. And we also know that online, we know that engagement can be really difficult. So whenever possible, you want to make sure you're keeping your group involved and really trying to work with them to engage them. In terms of you as presenter, think about how you want to do this. Do you want to take time introducing yourself and telling them all sorts of stuff that, you know, for the most part, they really are not all that concerned about, right? It's good for them to have some idea of who you are, but I think oftentimes they learn a lot of that through the presentation itself. And then the other thing I say is make good use of those pre-mails. I always tell people to get on 5 to 10 minutes early because I will begin on time. I let them know that they need to be on camera the entire time. I also fill in the percentage of work that they need to complete in the pre-work so they know that they've reached that level. And then I will often ask co-instructors to provide me with just a brief bio, like a paragraph. So this takes care of letting the individuals know who we are in advance, and I'll send that out with the final email that I send. So they have an idea of who's presenting to them, and we're not taking time to introduce ourselves. And then I just tell them anything else that, you know, I'm going to expect for the day, if it isn't already there in the pre-mails that have been set up for us. So I think that that really helps a lot. Oftentimes too, before I begin, I will put this slide on the screen, and it tells them to ask them to let me know where they are on the stress level scale from 1 to 10. Now, it does a couple of things. One, it gives them a little something to do while they're waiting for us to start the presentation. It also gives me an idea of where my audience is as we start the day in terms of their stress level. If we have someone who's at a 10, we want to kind of keep an eye on that as well. So it really, as I say, it gives them a little something to do and also gives me and my co-instructor some information before we start. A lot of this you're already aware of, you know, let your audience know that the material is sensitive in nature, that it may, for some individuals, bring reminders for them of situations that they have been in themselves or family members have been in. And when I say rinse and repeat, make sure you're mentioning that as you go throughout the day and letting them know that they can take that break if they need it. Whatever you do, make sure that you start on time. It's one of the reasons I put in those pre-mails that I need them on 5 to 10 minutes beforehand. And I start on time. I will tell you that. If I say 9 o'clock, we are starting at 9 o'clock unless we have some kind of tech issues. And again, it kind of sets the tone for the day. Number one, it shows that you respect their time. You've asked them to be there. You've told them what time you're starting. So let's start at that time. It also lets them know that if you tell them to be back from a break at a certain time, and that's when we'll begin, it sets that up so they know that, okay, I need to be back because they'll be starting. They're not going to wait for me. So again, start on time. I also like to start with a thank you to let them know who is taking care of the training for them, who is paying for that. So they're aware of it. If you decide to do an icebreaker, I would say make sure you're doing something that is kind of short and sweet. Sometimes we have, 25 to 30 people on a virtual training. And if we get into a situation where they're answering a question and they have to take some time to answer it, I mean, we can be using a lot of time right there. And what I say is don't lose them before you even begin. Because once you call on the person and ask them to, give their answer to the question and tell us what's going on, oftentimes until it gets to the person who is waiting to give their answer, they've checked out. So generally what I will do is if we have a large group, what I'll do is ask them to let me know what their role is and perhaps what city they're located in, since oftentimes we have individuals from across the state. So it really is very helpful to do that. And as I say, that icebreaker can take a lot of time if it gets out of hand. So don't lose them before you even begin. Tell them, what's in it for me with them. Right? What's in it for me? In other words, what am I going to get out of the training today? And generally what I talk about is algae and talk about how they're going to learn something that they can use with anyone that they run into. It's a great conversation skill to have. And that's one of the things that they're going to learn for the day. So in other words, what do they get out of the day? In terms of the chat box, decide how you're going to use the chat box. One of the things I've noticed recently is if I tell people, to unmute or put it in the chat box, lately I've had more and more people just putting things in the chat box. So it's almost like I feel like I'm talking all day long. So I've decided, and this worked better for me the last time, is I would say, I need you to unmute and tell me. And then at times, if I wanted something in the chat box, I would ask them to use the chat box. But for the most part, I really want them to unmute. I really want that interaction because again, it's hard to get virtually. And if it's just in the chat box, we have a tendency to end up reading what's in the chat box to everybody else, or somebody misses something that's in the chat box, or sometimes we miss something that someone put in the chat box. So I think a lot of times if we can encourage them to unmute, we're going to have better responses. Again, telling them your expectations for the day. We've had some of those already in those pre-mails that we send out, but also letting them know, again, they're going to need to be on camera for the entire time. How do you want them to handle their own breaks? If they're going to have to take a break themselves, to make sure that they private message either myself or my co-instructor, whoever isn't speaking at the time, to let me know that they're going to be coming back. And we also want to model the behavior that we want to see in them. So if I'm expecting them to be on camera the whole time, I need to be on camera and I need to be paying attention. Now, sometimes I will tell them, that you might see me looking down, I'll be taking attendance, or I may have a message coming in from the other instructor, but I want to make sure that I'm doing the same thing I'm requesting of them, making that eye contact. If my co-instructor is saying something and I'm agreeing with it, I want that head nodding so they also see that I'm paying attention. And the other thing I would say is kind of watch your facial expressions. This is something I learned from doing a lot of in-person trainings. I would have a tendency, to have my resting face, which I'm older, my face has a tendency to pull down. And so oftentimes I kind of looked almost like I was mad. Or that I just wasn't happy to be there. So oftentimes what I will do is what the woman here is doing on the right-hand side. You just put a little smile on your face and you just hold it there. And I will do that as I, go through the virtual training. It's something you have to train yourself to do. But if you do have a tendency to have one of those faces that's kind of, not looking very pleased, I would suggest that you take a look at doing that. As you're presenting, watch for filler words, or what I call sometimes they're really brain pauses. Are you using okay a lot, or or I have to watch this with myself all of the time, because I find that sometimes I give up one word and I replace it with something else. Lately, my word was right, and I do it right, and then nod my head and like a question mark. It's difficult to do, but try and pick up on those things, or again, ask your co-instructor as you're going through to, pick up on anything that you might be doing that's like that. And we all know stories can be very, very good. They can really help to get a point across. And there's a rule that I learned when I first went through my mental health first aid training. And the rule for telling a story was called Brian, right? So if you're going to tell a story, the story should be brief. It should be relevant. If it's about someone else, you should have permission to tell it. And the story should be non-stigmatizing. So again, oftentimes those stories can be very helpful. But I will also tell you, if you have too many stories, you can sabotage your own presentation. And you also need to not have too many stories, because you need to be considerate of your co-instructor. Now, a brief, relevant story to tell you that I have permission to tell. A gentleman that I used to train with in youth mental health first aid told lots of stories, and he had lots of good stories. But the problem was, is he had so many, he would start out with a story, and people at the beginning, of course, thought, oh, this is great, this is wonderful. And then by the end, it would be a matter of, oh no, here we go with another story. And then his co-instructors had problems because they were trying to make up for the time that he had taken telling the stories. So you really need to be considerate on those, making sure again that they're also relevant and adding to the point that you're discussing. In terms of to do breakouts or not to break out, this is personal opinion. This is nothing more than that. I typically don't do breakouts when I'm presenting. And the reason is I found that it took a lot of time. Oftentimes when I would go into the breakout rooms to kind of check on people, it would either stifle the conversation because I had come into the breakout room, or I would get in there and find out what they were discussing was what were they supposed to do, because they didn't really get a clear instruction, or they didn't hear the instruction. So I've stopped using breakout rooms. But again, that's a personal preference, but just be mindful that they are something that are going to take up a little bit more time for you. Okay, so who can tell me, what do they think is the kiss of death for a presentation that involves a PowerPoint?
Reading line by line.
Absolutely. Yes. Let me read this to you. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a killer right there. Now, I understand there are certain slides that come up where you do feel like you need to touch on every line. But for the most part, what happens is, yes, Jay, death by PowerPoint, absolutely. What happens for the most part is our brain goes faster than what I can speak about that's on the slide, or that I can read to you what's on the slide. So you've already gone through that slide. And here's a good example, the one on psychosis. There are 14 bullet points on here that all come up at once, right? 14. So what I do is, when you have a slide like this, pick a couple of them to talk about and highlight those. On this one, I might talk about dressing inappropriately for the weather. So this might be someone who, when it's 85 degrees out, they're wearing long pants, a coat, a scarf, and a hat. I generally, in this one, I always touch on delusions or hallucinations, asking people, what's the difference between the two? See if we can draw them in again to get some participation, so they are answering the question for us. So again, it's up there, they can read through it, but pick out a couple of those that you want to talk about. Don't read it to them for sure. For slides that kind of have transitions or bullet points, the way I try and keep people engaged is, for example, this slide, when you first pull it up, it will have the action A and then the assessing for risk of suicide or harm approaching. And what I will do is I'll say, so what I want you to think about, if you had a problem or a concern or an issue, how would you want someone to approach you, right? So, and they're going to give me the answer. They're going to talk about, they want someone who would, do it with empathy. They're going to tell me that they want someone to do it in private. So again, just asking questions and trying to get the answers before we put that bullet point up there. Some of them, again, we do have to just go through and touch on, but again, try and get them engaged by asking them questions before we put the answer up on the slide. Same with this one here, professionals who can help. Okay, so if you had a concern, you were facing a mental health challenge, or someone you loved was facing a mental health challenge, who is somebody that they might go to that would be considered a professional in the field of mental health, right? So they'll give us the answers for that. Oftentimes with the certified peer specialist, we may very well have people in our group who are certified peer specialists. So that's one of the ones I find that we get questions on from people. So I'll oftentimes ask, is there anyone in the group that's certified peer specialist who'd like to explain that? So again, trying to get them to provide the answer as opposed to me telling them what is the answer to the question. Now, the other part is, let's be real honest here. Most people will not print off the participants processing guide. Most people, if they're at home with a home computer, that's a lot of pages to ask them to print off. And even with us putting the participants processing guide in the chat box, it can be really difficult for people to kind of toggle back and forth between that as we're going through the day. So generally what I have done, and this is me, this is bad Pat, okay? Bad Pat has inserted into the PowerPoint the exercises that we have. Now, I did this because I can throw it on the screen and we can actually, everybody can see it, and then we can talk about it. So for example, in this exercise, what I would say is, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. I want you to read through these different statements, and I want you to pick out 2 of these that you think would be helpful approaches for you, and 2 that would not be helpful. And then we'll just get into a discussion and ask people to share. On this one, we almost always touch on 2, the difference between number 1 and number 11 in terms of, why are these 2 so much different from each other? And why might one be better than the other? So again, I do this for a lot of the exercises. I did this for the
Give reassurance.
Yes, thank you. The give reassurance. What are the responses in giving reassurance that would be helpful to someone? When it comes to getting ready to show the various videos, I will put up the page that we have in the participants processing guide that asks them what to look for. So again, I haven't added anything that isn't part of mental health first aid. Quite frankly, for me, I feel I've just made it easier for myself and easier for the participants, so they're not trying to leaf through or trying to find it on screen. And again, it gives that opportunity to have that discussion with them to make sure we're engaging them. The other thing is, how are you going to handle the scenario or the scenarios? Again, this is something to discuss with your co-instructor. Are you only going to do one scenario? Are you going to do 2 or more? Are you going to do it as a whole group? And again, I've started doing it as an entire group. I also put the questions on there. I put it on the screen. I've written it out, put it on the screen. Again, it's mental health first aid. And then I put what are we going to do in terms of the group discussion? And I will give them some time to think about it. I will also tell you, you will see I have done away with asking the question, are they in crisis? The reason I do that is because when we're putting these scenarios up, we haven't even discussed what we consider to be a crisis situation. So we're asking them a question that we haven't given them the answer to yet in terms of what we're looking for as a crisis situation. Again, personal preference on that. So this is Pat talking here, right? As you go through the day also, in terms of asking for questions, this is something I just learned about this from some teachers. And it's hard for me to rephrase, but it really helps to do so. So instead of asking the question after a section, do you have any questions? Try to rephrase it and ask, what questions do you have? Because oftentimes when we ask that question, do you have any questions? People don't want to ask questions because they don't want to either admit they don't know the answer or they don't want to take the time. Here, it's a little bit different phraseology, but what questions do you have? Assuming that everyone would have some kind of a question, right? So not assuming that they have a question because they don't know. Cutting time. This is something I saw in the chat box about concerns about presentations. And it's really something I think you need to talk about again with your co-instructor. How are you going to cut time? As I say, for myself, I found some ways to cut time was to take away the breakout sessions and to do everything as a group. Another area that I found where I was saving some time is, the recap activity, asking them to read those pages in the processing guide. Again, they might not have that in front of them. And also when I looked at it, what they're reading about is they're reading about a lot of the different disorders. We don't discuss them during the rest of the day other than psychosis. So I kind of looked at that as, why am I having them read that? And someone had said to me, why are we reading this when we're not really discussing it? On the knowledge check, I used to do a poll and have them answer the questions that way. I went up to a thumbs up, thumbs down. How did I decide to do that? I looked at my evaluations and they said, why are we spending so much time on the recap and on the knowledge check when we just did it? And I had that comment several times. So it wasn't just a matter of one person, but several people said, we're spending way too much time on that. On the small group discussion, I've gone to simply asking the question of the group, given what you know currently about mental health first aid, how do you see yourself using this? How are you going to use it? And again, it gives them a chance to answer that question. It doesn't necessarily have to be, how are you going to use it in your community, or how are you going to use it in your job? How do you see yourself using it, given what you know so far? Another place, and this was a suggestion, I believe it was from Bridget, was when it came to the videos on shining a light, was to put two of them together, as opposed to showing one, answering the question, showing another, answering the questions. Put the two together and have them answer the questions for both of those at the end of the second one that you show. Or you can put 1 and 2 together, you can put 2 and 3 together. But again, it just helped with timing. It really helped with timing. I think it also helped with focus on the individual. So thank you for that tip, Bridget. That's worked out to be great.
I don't think I can take credit for that one. That might have been Jeremy.
Oh, was it Jeremy? Okay,
I think
whoever
so.
it was.
Yeah. But yeah, kudos to him.
Whoever it was great. The other thing, keep in mind that humor is okay, right? It's a heavy topic, but humor is okay to use. I'm one of those people, I like the dad jokes. And oftentimes at the beginning of my day, I'll say something like, I was getting ready to start this morning. I realized I was hungry, but I wasn't that hungry. And I happened to have a McDonald's right down the road from me. So I ran down to McDonald's. I ran in, grabbed a kid's meal and left. Boy, was his mom mad.
Yeah.
So it also gives me a feel for, are people listening to what I'm saying, right? So what is their reaction? And you can pick it up on the video there. So again, keep in mind, humor is okay, as long as it's not something that's stigmatizing and that we're not doing anything that is certainly making fun of mental health issues. The other thing I would say, as I go throughout the day, we are always emphasizing self-care. But when I get to the self-care section, I actually review this plan with people and will ask them questions. I think it can be really helpful, because then it starts to show them that this isn't just something we gave them and we don't want them to go back to it. Some of them will have filled it out. Many have not filled it out. So I might ask them a question about intellectually. We know how important it is for us to keep our brain active and to remain lifelong learners, to keep that brain active. So tell me some things that you do that stimulate you intellectually, and we'll talk about that. And then maybe we'll talk about something spiritually. We don't generally go through all of them, but again, emphasizing that it is important, and especially for individuals who are working with other individuals in the helping profession, because we know that we are the worst at self-care. Now, the other part of this is, if you've been talking about self-care as you've been going throughout the day, and we cover that as part of the second E in algae. If you get to this section and you're running out of time, you will have at least planted that seed and have covered it. Another kiss of death for presenting is not ending on time. Right? You have to end on time. Again, we have to be respectful of people's time. And this is one of those things that if you go over, I can almost assure you that your evaluations are going to be dinged for going over. Those of you who have instructed with me, a lot of you know that my goal is always to end early. I mean, even if it's 15 minutes early. And when we do that, what I do is I talk to them about the gift of time. Look, hey, look, we've ended 15 minutes early. We ended 20 minutes early. What I would like you to do is I would like you to go ahead and take that gift of time that we've just given you and do something to take care of yourself. Don't check your emails, don't this. Make sure you're taking that. So we've got that self-care piece in there again. And I do give them the self-care guide. I send it out with the email, and then we also put it in the chat box again. So yeah, I think if you can get them to fill it out ahead of time so we can talk about it and have more of a discussion when we get to that point, that it can be helpful. Now, I've also had it where we've gotten to the end of the day and we haven't talked about self-care yet. And what I will do is I will tell them that in the interest of self-care, I want to make sure we're being respectful of your time. So we're going to end here. And I give them the instructions, the final instructions. But what I also tell them is, for those of you who would like to stay on, we're going to continue with that section. So they've gotten all the content that they need for the day. But if I get to the point where we're at the end of the day and that time is over, then I want to make sure that I'm getting them out on time. And finally, at the end, tell them what to expect next, obviously, that they'll be getting that other email that we really need them to do, those the quiz and those evaluations to generate their certificate. The other thing I will say too is make sure you're promoting mental health first aid. I will often tell people, if you belong to a group that might be interested in bringing mental health first aid in, please contact us. Let us know. We can put you in touch with the funders that may be able to help you out. So again, really promoting, because a lot of people really like it. And we'd like to see other people get the benefit of the program. The other thing is, don't forget to debrief, right? In other words, with your co-instructor, right? Discuss, what went well. Where could there be improvement? Any concerns that you might have about some of the participants? So is there anyone you need to maybe follow up with or follow up with the host on? And any suggestions that each instructor has for each other. I used to do this when we were doing in-person presentations when I was under a grant. We would always sit down and debrief and talk about it and say, what went well, what didn't go well? Was there a place that I went over where I shouldn't have? Was there something I said that was inappropriate? So again, really having that debriefing, I think, is very helpful. And keeping in mind that, presenting and all of this really is a work in progress. So it's something that you continually have to kind of go back to and hone your skills on. And again, the way you do that, and one thing I can't emphasize enough, and people know this, is practice, practice, practice. And I think if you do a lot of these things, and again, some of these things that I told you are my opinion, others are based on actual information coming from professional presenters. I think if you do that, you'll see that your evaluations are really going to improve. And I think that you'll see that you really have a lot of success with that. I will give you an excellent resource. It's called the Sandusky Group. And if you go into the Sandusky Group, if you just Google it and click on their blog, you will get a ton of videos on presenting. And Jerry Sandusky, that's Jerry with a G, is an excellent presenter. He's a sports broadcaster, but he has really honed the skills. And I was trying to find, he has an email that you can sign up for. I couldn't find it on there. I don't know why, but I will get something from him usually, once or twice a month. And it's always something about how do you enhance your presentation skills, or If you have your own company, how do you handle your own branding? So he's somebody that I really picked up a lot from, and that's where a lot of this information came from today. So I'm going to stop there and see if we have any questions or anything that might be of concern to you. Or any comments. And Rich, I saw you had a comment in there about taking the PowerPoint down and making it smaller, which I think is great. That really helps.
No, Pat, I think this was great. More of just a comment. This is really so helpful. I was really writing down a lot of different tips. I think one of my takeaways is the attaching the presenter bios as a way to, in the pre-mails, as a way to, buy more time on that beginning. I think that's excellent. I love that.
Yeah, as I say, it's typically only a paragraph. So it's not too much that we're asking them to read.
Mm-hmm. And I like your ideas about the slides too, inserting, again, I'm guilty of a lot of things in life, and I'm probably going to have all kinds of things to answer for one of these days in my life when the end time comes. But I don't know that I'm going to feel that guilty about adding in their slides. I'm adding their material into the slide deck. I know that we're not supposed to, but I like that idea of including those pieces from the PPG because they're not printing them out, and it's such a it is a hassle. It's a lot to ask too. I get why they're not printed out. Yeah. So I love that.
And that was kind of my take on it. My take was I'm not putting anything in that isn't theirs.
Right.
Right. And it helps with your visual learners too. Trying to get all three of your learners involved by texting. I like that at the beginning, 1 to 10, just making sure that they're there and they're starting that connection to some degree. So before you even start class.
If we're not facilitating learners, we're not teaching to fidelity.
Yeah, that's true.
We're giving them the content we're being asked to deliver.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Hi, Janet.
Hi. Pat, that was awesome. Thank you.
It was.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
I just did my first in-person class last week. And everything that you said, I'm like, that would have helped. Yep.
Oops, a week late.
The first one is always clunky.
It was fun though.
You have to get through it. Yeah. Learn it. Yeah.
It was hard to speaking to the people. They had so much to say. They were so engaged. It was a big group and I ran out of time like everybody else says. And I was like, all right, what do I cut? It was just like exactly what but it was, I really liked it. Like if I did this more teaching, I think I'd be like, yeah, this is fun. I can see why people do this a lot because it was just a good day. So, but thank you for your tips. That was really helpful. Oh, and I've taught with you before and I'm like, yep, Pat said this here. So I remember a lot of stuff.
But I do think that, in person, you can read people's faces so much better. You can see what's going on. You can engage them so much more easily. Yes. So, virtual is great. And it definitely serves a purpose, especially getting out to people that we may not get out to. Yep. But yeah, to me, nothing beats in person, personal.
It was fun.
All right, Bridget, it's yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Pat, so much. Really, this is fabulous, and I love the highlight that you put on this too about the evaluations because those evaluations are so critical for us to learn about ourselves and to learn about those areas that we can continue to do, and then areas that we can continue to strengthen. So hopefully everybody knows how to access those evaluations. If not, let me know. And there's also a video on Trello board, of course, but I'm happy to kind of walk through that with you. And we on the project team side too, we're taking a look at those evaluations to find those areas of, celebration where we're getting that positive feedback about our instructors so we can highlight that. And then to also be able to support folks in areas if they want that. So I think that's a good, that's a good reminder about those evaluations. So thank you all very much for your time. And Pat, thank you so much. This was wonderful. This is so wonderful to hear your expertise. And thank you, Rich. We love that. We love that. And we invite, I love that. We invite all the instructors to please share your information, just like what Pat did. Pat reached out to us to offer this this gift to us, and we're so grateful and appreciative. So if you, as all of us, again, we're coming to the table as experts. Our expertise that we bring to the table. Please share it. That's how we are going to continue to grow and keep MHFA going through the state of Ohio. So thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Yeah, we're giving you the gift of time with those 4 extra minutes you have.
That's right. Thank you.
I need them.